You know that old saying, the devil is in the details? Well, that applies to our gospel. So here we have, in the gospel, Jesus is tempted 3 times, once with bread, once with power, and once with safety or security. So then we also have in our Genesis passage this wonderful story of Adam and Eve that we've heard a lot, over the years, and it's always one of those, whose fault is it? It's Adam's fault. No, it's Eve's fault. No, it's the snake's fault. And in fact, theologians have argued for years, and still do, about what that all means, especially feminist theologians who say, hey, don't put the blame on the women. He wasn't smart enough to make his own decision. We're not going to settle that today. So the 3 temptations that Jesus is given by the devil, one is, if you're hungry, and he had been fasting for 40 days, that's a long time, it's more than a month. Jesus was hungry, and the devil says, hey, I'll make all these stones into bread, and you will have everything you need to eat. And Jesus sends him away. And then the devil says to Jesus, why don't you just throw yourself off the mountaintop, and the angels will pick you up if you really the Son of God, if you are who you say you are. So I am putting the layer on top of this is about safety and security. Do not put God to the test. And then the third one is the temptation of power. I can give you the power over the entire world, the devil says. And Jesus says, get away from me, sends him away, and puts all of the words, all of his trust in God, his Father. So those are the temptations that Jesus had. And I want to talk now about the temptations that we have that are really the same, or very, very much in tune with those. Our temptations, it's a bit too easy if we just use the temptations that are listed here, because most of us have enough food and we have enough power. We don't need that, we think. But if we measure these temptations in terms of our reactions to things in our world, then we have another story. We must ask ourselves, is it what would please Jesus? Is it a loving thing to do? Is what we do pleasing to our God? And I would like to start with hunger, the temptation of hunger. Just the other day, and this is my confession, I bought myself a little chocolate bar made by Lake Champlain Chocolates. It's very thick and very small, and I was craving chocolate. I have a need for chocolate about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I read somewhere that was a good thing to have. Well, when I got into the house from the grocery store, I thought, well, I won't have it now. I'll put it aside. And I put it aside, and then the next day I couldn't find it. I couldn't find it. And I didn't find it until 3 days later, and it's still there, and I haven't eaten it. One thing that you should know is that Sundays are not a day of fasting, so I'm going to eat that chocolate today. Anyway, there it is. It's a matter of craving and wanting and needing something. And when we are tempted to follow that need by something that's not good for us, then we are not pleasing God. So the second temptation, I'm layering this with my interpretation, which is it's about safety. Oh, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself off the mountain. Who will rescue us when we do that? You and me. We do have fear. In fact, fear actually governs most of what we do. We get into a car, and when we pull out of the road onto the road, we have to look both ways. When we cross the street, we have to look both ways. Why? We're afraid, or we need to be afraid, that we're going to get hit or hurt. So, but we also have fear that drives us in other ways, like, oh, I'm not going out, or I'm not traveling here. And sometimes the fear keeps us from doing the right thing. And then the third temptation is the temptation to power. And I have to say that of the three temptations in this gospel reading, the one about power is universal. It's not confined to any generation or any time. Power is what we all seek from the moment we are born and scream, "Mommy, feed me." So following God and not being pulled into these temptations are formidable challenges to us. So really, Christianity is not an easy life. Most often we talk about being nice to people. I don't need to go to church. I'm nice to people. I don't go. And we go on and on. But the truth is that to be a good Christian, or to be a Christian, period, is very challenging. If we authentically examine our reactions to these basic temptations and measure our actions against what pleases God, what is loving, how do we find ourselves? The devil is in the details. There is really no place to hide. The most wonderful implication in these stories is that we are always forgiven because God is in those details too. Now let me offer some general information about our world, the world we live in, and how difficult it is to follow God. I read a report by Hunger in America. They did a report in 2014. And in our country, the food insecurity is 30%, they say, of people in the United States have food insecurity. And that of those people, 58% have at least one family member with a diet-related chronic disease. When I was Minister of Mission in Malden back in 1986, they had a soup kitchen. I was running it, and there was this conflict with the volunteers from the church because we had to decide who was going to get and how we were going to do second course or second servings. I'll have seconds, you know that. So one woman said, well, nobody should get any seconds. You know, they should fill up on their first meal, first serving, period. And I said to her, I said, you know, people are hungry. And if they're hungry, they should have as much as they need to fill that hunger. And she said, they're not hungry, they're fat. So in her mind, which came from her experience, that if you were really starving, you were skinny. And of course, we know that that's true. It used to be true. Today, a person's weight often is an indicator of their poverty.
Amen.
So what can we do about that? There's a lot we can do about that. And God is calling us to that. So when we think about how we are following God, we need to think about, how do we react to people who are overweight? You know, there's so much in our culture that says you have to be skinny to be beautiful, to be liked. And what do we do in our communities to help the people who are poor and hungry? So these stories help us to understand what God is calling us to, especially in this Lent in 2020. These stories of temptations are a wonderful affirmation that God knows our world and knows our struggles. But the really wonderful thing is that God gave us Jesus, flesh and blood. Think about that. Jesus had to eat every day. Jesus lived in the world like you and me. So Jesus understood hunger, power, and fear. And I'm going to give one more plug here for an event that we're going to have here. We're going to have someone come and talk to us about safety and security in terms of the internet. A woman named Robin Putnam, who works for the Department of Consumer Affairs here in Massachusetts. And she goes all over the state and gives talks about what our rights are and how to protect ourselves. And she's coming here to speak on March 23rd. So I invite you to put that on your calendar, as when we talk about fear and safety and the temptation to use the internet in ways that may not be as healthy as we'd like. It will help us. So we are here to receive this lesson on the struggles of life and the assurance that God is here with us in the struggle. Amen.
Amen.